Just a few of the things happening there. Even though temperatures, of course, here in Austin are frigid, debates are showing no signs of cooling down this week at the Capitol. Here's a bit of a recap. The Senate sent over a suite of bills to the House aimed at keeping certain criminal defendants in jail while they await the outcomes of their cases. Plus, the Texas lottery took fresh heat from state senators who are now wanting to rein in how people can buy tickets. And just this morning, the House finally unveiled its version of a plan that would let families use taxpayer dollars to pay for their children's private school tuition.
Lots happening, and of course we'd like to bring in some experts for insight. Two former lawmakers joining us. Dennis Bonnen here, former House Speaker who represented Southeast Texas, and then over next to Will, Mark Strama, who previously served as a Democratic representative for the Austin area. Welcome back to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, we do want to start with school choice. We saw the House bill filed just this morning, so I think that's the latest thing for our audience. We previously discussed how the Senate has passed its version, but now we're seeing the text of the two bills, and we do see some differences in what's being proposed. That indicates to us it may head to a conference committee where lawmakers will have to hammer out those differences. But our question to you all is, what stands out about those differences? Do you think it's something that lawmakers in the two chambers will be able to overcome in their efforts to pass this, or will there be some insurmountable differences?
No, the differences are not insurmountable. And really on any major issue like this, it really comes down to where there's a will, there's a way. And so the House and Senate will easily be able to resolve whatever differences exist. And the reality of it is, I say this respectfully, a lot of times people want to talk about what the differences are, but I think I would be talking about what the similarities are. You have a Speaker of the House who has been a part of a press conference saying, well, here are our suite of education bills, school finance reform, more money for teachers, more money for public education, and here's school choice too. That's never happened. So that's a big deal. Of course, the Senate has been pushing school choice. The governor's been pushing school choice. So they're a lot closer on the concept and the theory. The difference that I see is that in the House, they prioritized learning disabled children and low-income children in a different way, in a higher way than they did over in the Senate. Both of those are going to get figured out. The Senate did a better job in how to functionally operate the process in the system. They did a better job on the function of payments and the management of those payments, which has been an issue around the country where they've done school choice. Some of the payment systems haven't been handled properly and effectively. So the Senate does a better job than the House does on that. All of these, though, are easily resolved issues between the House and Senate. I think the story of the day is the House is also prioritizing school choice along with education improvement.
Mark, we do know not everyone in the House is on board with this. So any response after looking at the language of the bill?
So it's going to take a while to really understand the detailed differences. Look, I'm not going to argue that that some voucher bill won't pass. It'll probably pass. We've had a 2-year knockdown, drag-out battle in the Republican primaries. We have a large Republican majority in both chambers. They're probably going to pass a voucher bill. The question, but it does matter what's in the details of those bills. And as much as it's definitely the case that the bill will ultimately be written in conference committee, the message of what the conferees are fighting for in conference committee is delivered by the House version of the bill that passes the House. So the debate that's going to occur in the House in the coming weeks matters a lot. And there are huge questions about how the bill might differ from the bill that passed the Senate. How many students will be sent to private schools through these vouchers? How big will the vouchers be? Can they be supplemented by private funds from the family receiving the voucher? To what extent will they prioritize serving low income and special needs students? I mean, those are really important features of the bill that we won't know until the bill comes off the floor. How will it serve people in rural areas where there isn't a huge infrastructure of private schools to service the vouchers? Will people be able to take it home and use it for homeschooling? I mean, there's just so many details that have to be worked out. And I don't think any of those questions, I don't think the answers to any of those questions are preordained. I think those will be debated on the floor of the House.
There is going to be so much more to discuss on that, and there's been no votes just yet on the House side related to this particular bill. But all of this is all coming together as there is an influence campaign happening both inside the chamber and outside it, with many different groups launching campaigns to try to influence how these lawmakers vote. Given your experiences in this chamber, Does that have much impact when you're getting these outside voices kind of shouting at you in many cases, or deriding you, or influencing you to vote a certain way? Does it have any impact at all?
It does, done correctly.
Okay.
The shouting doesn't work nearly as well as intelligent conversation. Respectful consideration. I had early in my legislative career, way back when, they shut down my office with faxes. Okay, no one knows what that is anymore.
Flooding them with faxes.
But
yeah.
we were flooded with faxes. We couldn't get anything in, what have you. That didn't make me feel better about their issue. And so I like that example in that it matters, the respectful discourse, the respectful messaging. The best constituent correspondence I ever received was from a gentleman who wrote on a torn out piece of notebook paper saying, "Don't do this. I will be upset if you do this. I don't like this. Please don't do it." That meant a lot, because that showed me this gentleman cared enough to handwrite a poorly stated message, by the way, but I got what he meant. So that messaging matters, but it matters if it's done with intelligence and respect and with sincerity behind it.
Yeah. Does that open the door for Democrats to try to wedge in and share their concerns about this?
I mean, the question of how outside groups influence political decision-making is a huge one. There are a lot of different examples. I agree about the vitriolic nature of that communication is generally counterproductive. Volume, numbers matter. Politicians are in the business of counting votes. And the perversion of our system is that today, because most politicians represent gerrymandered districts that are decided in the primary, where fewer than a quarter of the voters participate in the primaries, only half of them vote in your primary, and only half of those are necessary to win. You can get elected to public office with the support of fewer than 10% of the people you represent. Because of that, these mass mobilization campaigns, very targeted constituencies, can have a profound impact because you don't have to win that many votes to win in a lot of these districts. And so people have to pay attention to them. I think Dennis is right. They can be done well or they can be done poorly. Done well, they can have a lot of influence.
Want to ask you one quick question before we move on to the lottery. We want to save time to discuss that. But speaking of influence, one of the biggest things we've seen with this school choice debate is the influence of the governor, one of his top priorities. We wanted to ask you, we've seen quite the shift in how Governor Greg Abbott is approaching this issue. We've seen lots of conversation on social media, some back and forth. What kind of reaction do you have to that shift in messaging from the state's top leader?
Look, the governor has the right to communicate. And I think that Governor Abbott, I'm not sure I agree there's been a shift, and that Governor Abbott's been clear for years. I want to pass school choice. I want parents to be empowered with their children's educational decisions in Texas. And he's using another tool in the toolbox to deliver that message. And there are times when, honestly, I wish the governor wouldn't respond to some people because I think he's the governor of Texas. And, the old saying is never punch down. I had an issue one time as a legislator and someone above me acknowledged me, and it made me more important than I probably should have been in that instance. So I would advise the governor to think about some of the time whether that person deserves the acknowledgement of the governor of Texas. But with that said, he is delivering his message through a mechanism now that, let's be candid, everyone walks around, I don't like it, I wish it wasn't happening, but people are obsessed with what comes through that phone, they're obsessed with what comes through that tablet, and they're obsessed with that messaging, and there are fewer and fewer people that get their information elsewhere, they get it there. So the governor's right, he's speaking through the mechanisms that people listen to.
I thought the change you might be referencing was that there's more of a kumbaya sentiment among the Republican leaders in the legislature this time. I saw some crazy Valentine's Day Twitter back and forth with heart-shaped candies.
Elon Musk, Lieutenant Governor, Governor, and Speaker Burrows all having a wonderful Valentine's Day.
Yeah,
yes.
I saw something
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
Well, maybe it's also that he's been grabbing certain Democrat lawmakers' tweets and then retweeting them, seemingly refuting what they've been
Yes.
posting about,
responses.
going
Yes.
against that.
Oh,
You
yes.
know, look, I mean, back in 2013, when I chaired the House Committee on Technology, I declared that Twitter would go down as the mullet haircut of our times. I thought it was bad for democracy that we were reducing our political discourse to 140 characters. I know now that you can have more and you can pay for even more. I don't generally love the vibe of us debating public policy, complex public policy issues in those forums. On the other hand, that is where the public is consuming information. And so everybody should be getting their message out that way. I think on this issue of vouchers, I mean, I just described a scenario where groups that represent relatively narrow constituencies can have a big impact on the political process because of these gerrymandered districts in which such a small percentage of voters can drive the outcomes of elections. We should all lament that. That is not the way it is supposed to work. That is not what's good for all of us, and that's not what's best for the public education system. I hope that this debate will at some point rise above those types of parochial considerations and look at the most important enterprise we do as a state, educate our children and figure out what's best for them.
And I know that, Avery, you had a really great question about the Texas lottery, because we want to turn the page and focus on that too.
It's tough with these conversations. So
Yes.
much happens before we see you guys on Thursdays. So we wanted to ask you, because we know scrutiny on the Texas lottery system, and for our audience, if you haven't kept up with the drama that's going on with the lottery system, you can find a lot of reporting on KXAN.com. But scrutiny on the system is actually nothing new. Back in 2013, when the two of you all were serving, the chamber, the House actually unexpectedly voted to end the lottery commission.
I was having lunch when that happened and had to come back and fix it.
So give us a bit of historical perspective. We saw the House quickly reverse course and,
Yes.
and reinstate it. So what happened there, and what can we learn from that situation about what's going on right now?
That was a great example, because I was across the street speaking to a business association with constituents there, and they killed the lottery, and I had to come back and explain to the chair of Pub Ed that was a couple $2 billion that I don't think we had in the budget to take away from public education at that time. And he came to his senses with many other members, and as you pointed out, Avery, quickly that vote got turned. What's really going on right now, though, is that the lieutenant governor is fiercely focused on couriers. He does not like the couriers being able to use the mechanisms that they are to go buy and purchase lottery tickets. The challenge the Lottery Commission is facing is that last legislative session, the Senate passed legislation that would have ended that practice of the couriers being able to operate in Texas. And the House didn't pass that. So there's now still that gray area of whether the couriers are operating legally or not in the process. Obviously, the Lieutenant Governor would say they're not, and they should be stopped, and the Lottery Commission needs to get that done and get it done yesterday. And in that situation, the Lieutenant Governor is doing what he's extraordinarily good at. He's really good at leverage. He's really good at pushing his program, pushing his message. He's one of the best I've ever seen. And so he's saying, I'll just do away with this whole thing. We'll kill the whole thing. And so that's what's really going on there, is the Lieutenant Governor is saying, I don't like this courier process. I told you it was bad. I told you to stop it, and you haven't. And so I'll not only take that away, I'll take the whole thing away.
I mean, once again, I don't think we have the billions of dollars to give back from the public school system. It is money that's dedicated to the public school system. I have mixed feelings about the general proposition. I'm old enough to have been a staffer at the Capitol when we enacted the lottery under Ann Richards as governor. And everybody had mixed feelings about it. It is a tax on people who mistake the odds. It is a tax on people who are not getting much for their dollar. And you know, as I've followed this story, the one concern I have about it is if investor groups are now able to game the system through the combination of the courier system and bad odds making, it shouldn't work that way. I mean, in Las Vegas type gambling, the house always wins. It seems like we have done something in the administration of the lottery where it is possible for somebody to game the system, which shouldn't be possible in a well-designed system.
Yeah, and quickly, and with our final few moments, I want to add a little bit more context to this, because you mentioned the Lieutenant Governor going so hard against the Lottery Commission, and particularly these couriers, but we have yet to hear anything from Governor Abbott. What do you think about that he's remaining quiet on some of these issues that are bubbling under the surface and making headlines?
Yeah, you just gave him the advice to say less. Now what?
I didn't say less. I said don't punch down.
Yeah.
I think the governor is actually very focused on school choice. I think he's very focused on getting the federal government to get Texas their $11 billion back for the governor leading the legislature to secure the border. And it's one of the skills that I think Governor Abbott has. And I think it's what makes Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick great partners. Governor Patrick is extraordinary at driving and delivering a message. Governor Abbott is really good at not worrying about getting involved in every last message. And so I think Governor Abbott's probably focusing on school choice, focusing on getting the money back for the border, and he is going to let the legislative process work itself out. This is between the House, between the Senate, and yes, the Lottery Commission, but the Lottery Commission, I think, feels like the stuck duck in the middle, saying someone pass a bill and I'll follow it. But right now that hasn't happened. And so I think the governor's just wisely doing what smart governors do, not jumping in the middle of every issue during a legislative session. You let legislators work through that, and then you decide whether you sign the bill or you don't sign the bill.
I mean, all I would add to that is it does feel like this is an issue that needs hearings. I mean, the legislature has a process for getting to the bottom of a complex issue like that. There has been a lot of reporting on it, but I don't know that most lawmakers feel, and the governor may not feel, that we know everything we need to know. And there will be a lot of hearings, and the process is set up to be pretty good at fact finding.
We could keep you here forever. Lots more to discuss. But thanks to both of you for making time. And a reminder for our audience, they'll be joining us every Thursday to break down what's going on behind the scenes at the Capitol.